my thing with decision making is just about the action. You just need to take action. I think in most situations in life, there's only two results, success or failure. So I didn't have the intention to run ads. My intention was to support this community. If we really want to create, whether it's generational wealth, personal wealth, or really create businesses in the community that will stand the test of time, we need to have a stronger foothold in the consumer industry. 2 days later, I get an email from a few of my clients say, look, we need to stop working because we're not sure where things are going. Bear in mind, just got a mortgage, got a 2-year-old, and my wife just quit her job the year before, and I'm the only person that's bringing in the bread. And for some reason, I still had the faith that it was going to work out.
You're someone that I've really, really wanted to get on the show because when I think back to my journey in terms of like entrepreneurship and taking a step out of work, it was at a 2019 event and you were speaking at the Indie Hackers event.
Oh, wow.
And just before you spoke was Johnny Buffalo from Hopin.
Yes.
And I remember at that time you were talking about your own experiences about like building a data-driven business and what encouraged you to step out to go full time with the business. But before we get into that, I want to take a step back and learn a little bit more about like data and culture because you're someone who has brought those two things together. And I want to say why data and culture?
Yeah, I think first of all, thank you for having me. And you just reminded me about the Indie Hackers event. And yeah, we need to speak about that because that for me was a life-changing moment because of what happened with Johnny's business afterwards, which has humbled me and is giving me a different approach in terms of how you approach business. And also our tagline is taking luck out of the equation. So we kind of accept that. Not saying he was lucky, but there was an element of, and he became, we could talk about that, but yeah, Johnny was amazing. To answer your first question. So I started my career in marketing after university. So I actually went to university to study finance. My rationale was, well, where is the money? The money's in the bank, finance, work my way backwards. Well, if I work in finance, then, I'll have a lot of money. Did the first year of university doing finance, but then you kind of, when you first start a business course, you kind of do everything else. You kind of dabble on accounting or whatever. And that's how I discovered marketing. So marketing was like, there was an introduction to marketing seminar that I went to and I just fell in love with it. And the data part came into it is, obviously I studied marketing, worked in corporate, I did an industrial placement, and I got a graduate scheme when I graduated. And I started to notice a shift. So I graduated in 2009. So this is post-recession. And that's really when digital marketing started to take off. Like before then, you didn't have a social media manager. Email marketing was there, but like there wasn't really like a pure focus on digital marketing. So what I started to see is that actually marketing started to become more data-driven or data-informed, should I say, especially on the digital side. What I always found fascinating about marketing is that a lot of people that work in marketing are very creative. They have a lot of assumptions and make a lot of assumptions from their gut, which sometimes works out. But what the digital shift started to do was to kind of start bringing in measurable frameworks so you can actually figure out, okay, you thought this, you've launched it, and actually we can actually look to see if it succeeded or not. So what I decided to do was like, well, since there's this digital marketing shift, I'm going to double down more on digital marketing. And as I doubled down on more digital marketing and as it became more broader and more opportunities start to come out, I'm always trying to find ways to kind of niche down. And what I noticed is even those people that were more well-versed in digital marketing, they lacked the data part of it. So they knew maybe how to launch a campaign, but they didn't know how to measure it. So it came from marketing to digital marketing to data based on the premise of me just kind of going down the rabbit hole of trying to differentiate myself from the market. So from that, I was working at Nissan at the time. Then I really decided to double down on data because there was just loads of reports saying like, data is the future. There was even a video from, I believe it was like the global head of scientists at Google. And he said like, if you can double down on data, you will never have to worry about jobs. So that was it pretty much. So introduced to marketing, kept going down the rabbit hole, digital, and then from digital, data. And I just wanted to kind of carve out my own space. And then the part of the culture was while I was in that job, I was also co-founding Mixtape Madness with my friends. And my job was very much to grow the platform. With limited budget, you kind of have to measure what's working, what doesn't work. And the way I was able to grow the business was through what they call growth hacking, which essentially is, which was new terminology at the time, is literally using data to figure out what's working, what isn't working. So, and I think as I kind of just went down that rabbit hole in the culture with Mixtape Madness and within my career around data, I just kind of created this intersection for myself, which then differentiated me from everyone else in the market.
Yeah, I love that, especially that big bet to go on data.
Yeah.
I remember actually like in 2010, 2011, people talking about big data and like, what does it mean, this, that, and the other. And even like cloud computing, like the words that we use today, which are so commonplace, but back then it was like a foreign language. So it's amazing that you're able to make such a big bet then and make it pay off. And talking to your experience with Mixtape Madness. So when you're a small organization, and people say use data, it can be hard to use data because there's not much data around. Correct. So like, where do you go? Like, how do you start off from scratch if you haven't really got much to go off?
Yeah, I think if you don't have a lot of data, because a lot of it, when it comes to like analysis, there's a thing called statistical significance. So have you got enough data to actually be able to say, this is true, right? Or is it just by random luck that this happened, right? So not to get too complex, but I think you can still make data useful with a small sample by using it more directional rather than like a definitive answer. So for example, if I ran a test and I got over 1 million people to come onto a particular website and I had like an A/B test. So A/B test is typically you have a control, which is like, okay, the website looks like this. We're just going to change the button on the B version and make it blue. And then you see which one do people click more, right? Very simple test. If I only send 5 people to that website and all 5 click on the blue link, I can't then say, oh, it's definitive that the blue link is going to do better because it's just aren't enough people. Whereas if I send 1 million people, that's a big enough sample to do it. When you're a small business, you don't have a lot of traffic. You don't have a lot of whether a mailing list or whatever. So you're working with a really small sample. What I say is always use it directional. So almost be like, okay, everybody click the blue link. We assume that that's the right color. Let's go with it for now, but it's not definitive. And it just means that you're able to just move forward because data should really, and that's why I use the word data informed rather than data driven, because data informed is just data's informing part of the decision making process. So you still need to use your gut and your experience. And sometimes, you know, when we started Mixtape Madness, it was like 5 of us. So it's hard to make decisions because everybody's got their own different opinions. Sometimes data is just that 6th person that can give you that direction to kind of say, okay, you know what? We all don't agree, but let's go with the data for this time, right? So that'll be the answer is like, if you don't have enough data, use the data to help you directionally to kind of just make a decision. Because that decision can even be wrong, but then you just keep iterating. As you get more data, you become better informed. So that'll be the approach, is like just having it as the 3rd person in a room, especially, or the 2nd person if it's just you.
I love the example that you brought up as well about like people like to trust their own gut and then use data to kind of like prove them wrong or prove them right. Can you give me any stories of experiences of have to bring data in the room to make a decision?
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's one of the most frustrating thing working in the data industry is, so just to give you a background. So when I left Nissan, I went to the British Medical Journal. I was a campaign selection executive, so I had all this massive database that I had to kind of go through. But what was really fascinating, one of the reasons I joined that company was because I was really impressed by the company's mission, like 3-year plan on data. And the guy I worked for was very data informed and like made decisions like very analytical. And it was good for me to have that balance because it was like, okay, really start to understand when somebody actually is super analytical, because I'm a bit of mixed of like bit of creativity and stuff. Anyway, but what I found is that you did find in various different places, people will try to manipulate data to allow them to get the decision that they want. And the answer to that really most of the time is, if you kind of made the decision anyway, just take the decision. No need to have to use data to prove it. Because sometimes you get the opportunity, you get a situation where people almost overanalyze as well, right? Or over-experiment. So I would say both are just as bad. So the person that is really trying to push the agenda of their gut or what they believe is just as bad for a business as somebody who is over-analyzing the situation and trying to find, you know, a data reason why to make that decision. Because my thing with decision making is just about the action. You just need to take action. right? I think in most situations in life, there's only two results: success or failure. Really, like there's no third. Like you either succeed or you don't, and then it's like, okay, what do we do next? So when you succeed, sometimes it's about also taking a step back and realizing, okay, was that luck, or was that actually the science and the gut and the internal understanding of the business? And I think one thing people underestimate is something called tacit knowledge.
Yeah.
So tacit knowledge is just knowledge that you have that you can't always articulate. And it's usually because you've done the 10,000 hours, you've done it so many times, you can look at that and be like, yeah, I know it's going to be blue because I've just seen it. And then the data comes out and proves it's blue.
Yeah.
And it's like, how did you know? I've done it so many times. Which is why I say data informed, because data is just, I always see it as it's the third, fourth, fifth person in that decision-making process. So it shouldn't be overused, but it shouldn't also be underused either.
Yeah. What I like about that as well is like, it's the tacit knowledge, things you know, but you don't know that you know, but still the willingness to test it.
Yes.
Because I feel like sometimes, even I can talk about this myself, like I'm not worried, but a little bit apprehensive of testing my assumptions in case I'm wrong. And so you're walking in like your own little cuckoo land and like, yeah, everything I touch turns to gold. It's always winning. But if you don't pressure test your assumptions, you don't know if you're making the right choices going forward, especially if something doesn't work as it used to work beforehand. And it also kind of stops you from making like optimization experiments. And it kind of reminds me of like one of your stories when you were working at Mixtape Madness working at Mixtape Madness, and you wanted to release a product to help artists around their like their touring schedules, giving them a big data project. But it didn't go as planned. Talk to me a little bit about that story.
Yeah, that was really fascinating. So the idea was to leverage the data that we were seeing in the platform to help artists plan their touring. And what was really fascinating is this was years ahead of its time. So when we built the business, so I'll give you a bit of background. So I joined Mixtape Madness after my friend Eddie and Andy Ayim came up with a concept. It was like, hey, wouldn't it be great if we had a UK version of that piff? And I was like, hey, that sounds amazing. So obviously I joined from a marketing standpoint. There were other competitors in the space. So you had like Download a Mixtape, you had Hood Tapes. So it was quite competitive. So we went, like I would say, it wasn't a novel idea. But one thing I learned in business school, in my business degree, should I say, was the thing about creating competitive advantage. And there was something called basically creating it's like core competence within the business that your competitors can't copy. So in the outside, they may copy your website, they may copy your strategies, but actually behind that, there's a strategy that you're building behind the closed doors that they can't copy. And for us, it was data. So I was seeing data was coming in, and I was like, guys, you know, we need to focus on getting people to sign up. We need to focus on people coming onto our website. Even if we don't make any money, we can leverage that data, because I can imagine most of the other websites weren't thinking like that. So off the back of that, I was like to the guys, hey, and we had limited budget. We'd put our own money in, and, you know, it was kind of a bit of a struggle. And I convinced the team to allow me to pay for a developer to build a dashboard which will ultimately show an artist where they're being downloaded, where people are streaming their stuff, so they can proactively plan to say, hey, look, we've got a growing audience in Scotland. Let me ring up the promoters in Scotland. I might do a show and make a little 500 to $1,000 here. Problem was, it cost us a lot of money. So we built it, but then it was like, okay, now we got to market it.
Before you go on, what were people's initial reactions to when you came up with the idea?
I think the team bought into it, because all of us were like, we studied business. It kind of made sense. It's like, it makes sense, right? So I got sign off from the rest of the management team, built it. Problem then became is we never got the artists involved in the process before we created it. So it's almost like we created a solution for people who we are not. I'm not an artist, right? I'm not an artist manager. And what we identified is the reason why the artists were using Mixtape Madness was, one, they were paying to be next to Wretch 32 and Chipmunk. They wanted to see their mixtape next to these artists that they grew up listening to, because for them, that gave them validation in their local area to be able to say, hey, you know, I got into the top 10 of Mixtape Madness streams. And you kind of see that this day and age with Grime Daily and whatever, people pay thousands of pounds to get their video on Grime Daily, one, because they'll get the reach, but also is be able to walk down the street and be recognized, right? So we realized the problem we were solving wasn't actually the problem that the artist was trying to solve. The artist was trying to solve a popularity problem. We was actually trying to solve an artist problem to actually make you a household name and make you some money. So when we launched it, we were trying to get artists on board and so it just wasn't connecting. And obviously it created a bit of friction because we put a lot of money into it.
How did that feel?
That felt quite, you know what, it was a bit of a kick into my ego a little bit. It felt a bit, if you feel a bit deflated, you know, especially you've taken a resource from the business, and you know the other directors trusted me, so it did feel like a bit of a kick on my personal ego, and was like, you know, you question yourself a little bit kind of thing. But what it did do though is, as a team, we did end up figuring out something afterwards, but naturally it creates friction in the business because you're you know, kind of limited in resource. So that was kind of one of the first shocks in my entrepreneurial journey, to kind of realize, actually I had this idea, executed it, had the backing. So it wasn't a thing where nobody didn't back me, but it didn't bang. But also it taught me the power of distribution, because how we marketed it, we could have done a better job. Maybe getting artists involved in the process could have maybe meant that we didn't have to spend so much money in building it. But then years later, that's how people have gone on to use Spotify. You see a lot of artists in America, maybe it's just a different market, right? They're probably a little bit more advanced. You hear like almost a decade later, you hear stories of artists going in the back end, looking at the data now, and now they can book their shows and stuff. But we were trying to do this back in 2009.
Yeah, wow.
So it wasn't wrong. Mm-hmm. It just probably was the wrong market, wrong timing. But yeah, that was a really good lesson on your gut. And also, it wasn't just gut. I was actually trying to create a core competence for the business, because I knew the rest weren't doing it. And it also would have created value for the business that if we were ever going to sell it, we'd have had this piece of technology and so forth that we could have pushed, but it just wasn't for the right market. So therefore, kind of deflated, and then we became a little bit more reserved in terms of taking these risks, which isn't always great for a startup.
Yeah. And it's always a shame when you're at a startup stage and you're too early for something, because you know it's going to work. It's just bad timing. We're just talking about this beforehand. Like first mover advantage, it's an advantage, but only if you have deep enough pockets to work on the other areas and then keep that kind of core competency, not as your, what's the word, golden ticket, but like your second kind of boost in your pocket just in case if you need it.
100%.
But also conversely to that, like although you might have had less success with that, you still had success with like the Wikipedia stuff and like growth hacking in those areas, right? And I always, when I read the story about what you did, so for context, Chipmunk was releasing his new mixtape and you went through his Wikipedia page and then just like spammed it with like Mixtape Madness links, and I was thinking, this is so dope. And then that put you up to the rankings in terms of like number 2. That kind of creativity of like figuring out ways to do things that haven't been done before, like where's your source of like that kind of innovation, would you say?
Very good question. I think it was very interesting with Mixtape Madness. I always say it's one of my favorite startups because I learned so much about myself, about the different members of the team, because we're all different, like all different personalities. And there was pressure. It was a pressure cooker because we all put our money in and the platform was taking off. And I was still in a job at the time. So I was still at Nissan at the time. So I probably was one of the few in the team that had very limited time because I had a career and I had all these other things I was doing. What got me into growth hacking was actually, we had a list of things we wanted to do. So we wanted to like send out emails. We were doing things on Twitter. We were trying to like post stuff on Facebook. And obviously the pressure was on me because I'm in marketing. So I'm trying all these different things and they're not working. Because I had the pressure of having a full-time job, it was also like, actually, hold on. I need to take a step back and actually figure out what's working rather than just keep doing it because I'm just going to burn out. Fortunately for me, I had another sort of startup prior, which was a blog. And through that, I learned about WordPress. I learned about Google Analytics. So you set up tracking and you could track things and stuff like that, as I mentioned. So then I took a stop and I just thought, okay, guys, out of everything we've been doing, I've just looked at the data and I've identified that we're number one with this artist. It was actually K Coke's mixtape that initially was number one. Mm-hmm. When I doubled down on that, I was like, okay, why are we number one for his mixtape? It turned out that 45% of the traffic was coming from Wikipedia. So it was by luck that I discovered this, right? So it wasn't something that I did. I didn't put that on Wikipedia. Somebody else randomly did. So then I was like, okay, cool, that's the luck. Now we're going to leverage that luck and do that for every single artist. So when we knew Chipmunk's mixtape was coming, or Chip's mixtape was coming, we did the Wikipedia piece. It allowed me to then start reading more about SEO. And I learned about that there's a new SEO patch that had come out called Panda, and what it favored was YouTube videos. So what we did is when we designed a page for Chipmunk, we put a YouTube video at the bottom because Google just acquired YouTube. So it was under the assumption, well, they're going to make that platform be successful. So, and also by putting a YouTube video in the post, it meant that people would watch the video and would keep them on the website longer, because one of the key metrics for a successful page is how long people stayed on the page. If you bounce, then it's like, well, you didn't find the content you're looking for. So if you put a YouTube video that is Chipmunk related, people are going to watch that. If they stay in for 5 minutes, that says to Google that this page is what I was looking for. So all these different hacks, but it all came from the fact that because I had a full-time job, I didn't have the resource to keep throwing things at see what sticks. It was like, I'm about to burn out. I need to take a step back and look at what's actually working. And then I found it. I was like, yeah. But there's the humility that comes with that, to kind of say, okay, I didn't do this, but now that I'm aware of this, I'm going to double down on it. And it goes back down to the core competence thing, because that's a piece of insight that we've internally discovered that our competitors don't. So then it's about doubling down on those things. And yeah, that's how we kind of got there. And then I just discovered this whole new world of growth hacking.
Yeah, no, I love that. We're going to go back to the burnout bit, but on the doubling down, I want to talk about that and like in the music industry in general. So I feel like we're in a space where a lot of artists are putting out a lot of music, not necessarily good. And I feel like they're maybe looking at the data and it's telling them one thing, which is great, but sometimes when you look at the data and you're analyzing it, it gives you more of the same rather than things that you don't want, rather than things which are new. How do you try and like combat that in itself, like with your clients and in general? And also, do you see that same issue in music as I've described, would you say?
100%. I'm less in the music industry as I was obviously when I was at Mixtape Madness, obviously I listened to it and stuff, but I'm more, funny enough, I'm getting in more into the podcast space or the creator space. And I'm seeing the same there. And I think most industries, most media brands or most media mediums leveraging digital are becoming too algorithmic and too data informed or data driven, even as a word. Because then everybody becomes the same. Everybody talks about the same topic. The rappers make the same songs. The videos look the same. That's the danger of data and algorithms. And the way these platforms work is they want to keep you on the platform as long as possible. So they want to personalize that. So then when you come onto Spotify or Facebook or Google or YouTube, should I say, to keep you on the website longer, they need to give you content that is going to keep you on there, right? So by things becoming more personalized, it then means that, you create these segments and fragmented audiences. And then once you look at the data of your audience, you're just seeing one picture. You're seeing a particular demographic of people that want to hear you talk about a particular thing, which is fine. Sometimes it's best to keep serving that. But the problem is you do too much of that, you're just going to keep going down a particular rabbit hole and become very algorithmic. So my issue with that, and I see in the music industry, but I want to speak about it more from a, like I say, podcast creator space, because that's probably where we're going to start partnering a bit more with, and I think there's a huge opportunity in the culture there, is be yourself. Like, really put out music, content, interviews, blogs, whatever it is, vlogs, that truly resonate with who you are. Because what will naturally happen is you build a tribe, and it might be only 1,000 people. But the problem is, when you go full-time as a podcaster or even as an artist, you need to make money.
Yeah.
And more time, the money comes with numbers. So you want to be saying, I've got 1 million listeners. Then those big brands are going to come to you and be like, oh, 1 million, yeah, that's great. Because those brands are focused on reach. They're not really focused on conversions, because they've already, they just want to be able to reach as many people as possible. Whereas the brands we work with, they want conversions. So one of the things that we did very well in 2022, the reason we threw our first event, was to connect creators from the culture with consumer brands in the culture. Because we realized we were spending millions of pounds on Facebook, Google, all these platforms, But how does Facebook and Google build these audiences anyway, or these interest groups? They build it based on the content that's being consumed on those platforms. So we was like, what if we could connect the influencers of today? I believe podcasters are the influencers of today, and the future. Anybody that you give 2 hours of your time a week, that's influential, right? What they eat, what they buy, where they shop is, you're going to listen to it. So the hypothesis was, what if our brand started sponsoring podcasts? And obviously we started with the podcast that had good, big reach. So like 90s Babies did an amazing partnership with Plant Made, which is like brought amazing returns for them. We've brokered other partnerships as well. But then I guess the problem then becomes is everybody then tries to get these large numbers. And sometimes they may do content that isn't necessarily authentic to them. Similar to an artist might make a song that isn't authentic to them because they're trying to reach those numbers, and it makes business sense. What we're trying to create is the opportunity for when you're having those conversations when you've only got 1,000 listeners, because those people care about you as much as, and probably even more so than the millions of people that are listening to the bigger podcasts, because they truly buy into who you are. So what we're seeing work really well is when we're partnering with smaller creators or partnering with smaller platforms, we're actually seeing good return. And we also want to make sure that those partnerships are authentic. So those podcasters or those creators are actually using the products and able to tell an authentic story. So to answer your question, I think it's understandable why people use data. But like I said, data should just be that third person in the room. You should still have your own gut and thing to be able to say, guys, are we going too far away from why we started this in the first place? Because most artists started because they got a talent, or they wanted to be a star when they were a kid. But then there's the music business, same thing with podcasting. You start because you want to have conversations with your friends, but then it becomes a business. And I actually think being counterintuitive in the long run will pay off. So actually building to stay small would actually make you bigger. And what I mean by that is having conversations that are true, that aren't thinking about how do we get 1 million views. Over time, people are going to be like, you know what? These are the guys that are really making the music that resonates with me. I mean, look at J. Cole. J. Cole's top 3 rapper. If you look this way, if you look at the top 3 rappers, you're saying Drake, J. Cole, and Kendrick. 2 of the 3 are what you would consider conscious rappers, right? Even Drake, like, he's not conscious, but he's not doing...
He's got a message.
He's got a message. He's not doing like,
ratchet.
Yeah, not everyday. So it's like, but you would argue all 3 of them stayed true to who they are.
Yeah.
It just takes time.
It's cool that you say about being true to yourself, because I feel like in this day and age, like you said, it's all about numbers. It's all about followers. It's all about reach. And like, even I can talk about personally myself, where I'm building this platform, building it slowly, building it sustainably, and trying to treat it in a way where I find it fun and not a business. But then sometimes you're like, oof, maybe I should take this more business. Maybe I should take it more seriously. But then it takes it away from like what you should be doing and speaking to the people that you are actually interested in listening to.
100%.
It reminds, what you were saying reminds me of a story, well, not a story, but like you had a Flagrant 2, the podcast with Andrew Schultz.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, so I remember when they started, like they were just talking about sports, and like the way they've grown is crazy because they really just focused on their listeners. And the way in which they got their brand to sponsor them first was by them asking their listeners, what brand should sponsor us?
Ah, sick.
And I think it was one of their listeners who owned a company or stuff like that, then ended up sponsoring them. And they were being sponsored by the companies that you don't get sponsored by, because their first one was called Blue Chew, which is like a Viagra Cialis company. And the way that they like narrate the ads are like so authentic, like so believable. I listened to an ad this morning on another podcast, which I won't name. And like, when I heard the brand, I was like, what? Why are they doing this? Because I know no one uses this brand for what they're selling for. Like they were promoting Auto Trader. And I was like, why are you talking about Auto Trader for this? Like no one uses Auto Trader unless you're buying cars from it. So it's like a different thing, like to do with MLTs. And I was like, that to me just didn't seem believable. It didn't seem relatable. It seemed like it's a larger brand trying to tap into a demographic and putting money that way. And you can support the creators that you enjoy by shopping at the places that they're advertising, but it's more authentic if they can literally give their stamp of approval on the product that they're advertising and actually can truthfully say that I do use this and this is how it benefits me.
100%.
Because even with podcasting in general, like I feel this is like such a digression, but
No, that's fine.
when you have to pay a monthly subscription and you as a listener, you pay that and you also have to listen to like 10 ads during a show, the user experience is really, really bad. So I do hope that in some way it's going to improve.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
100%. Well, we're actually releasing a platform in a couple of weeks' time called The Plug, which is essentially to bridge that gap between consumer brands and platforms such as podcasts and other communities. And ultimately what we want is to reward listeners of a podcast or a community within our community. So that could be black swimmers community or black golfers, or there's all these like really like niche communities, to reward their listeners and their supporters with exclusive offers from the brands that they actually mess with. Because those customers are everyday buying products from those brands anyway. What if they can? It's almost like an NHS discount card because you work for the NHS. It's almost like imagine getting a discount for particular products because you listen to your podcast, right? And it's an affiliate platform, so obviously it creates revenue for the podcast, but it also means you stay true. We're kind of incentivizing people to really focus on the conversations that matter to their community rather than trying to go viral so they can get those numbers and then, you know, end up working with a brand that isn't aligned and then, you know, just it's not sustainable.
Yeah, no, I love that.
Yeah.
And like you do a lot of work in like educating the brands that you work with and keeping them on track and on the message in terms of what they need to be doing and where they need to be. One of your phrases is that it's deeper than ads.
Yes.
I'd love you to explain a little bit more about what that means.
Yeah, so it's deeper than ads. So it borrows from one of my favorite rappers, Rick Ross, is deeper than rap. So it probably make more sense if I give you the context on how I got into doing ads. So I worked in marketing, Mixtape Madness, the whole story. You guys kind of know that. I started to see a trend. I've always wanted to help my community because I think there's a lot of conversations that we have around generational wealth, you know, improving the black community and all this kind of stuff. And most of these ideas that people have are valid, right? The challenge is always how do we execute it? And for me, it was like, I got introduced to a community called 10 by 10, which is a group of black entrepreneurs. I think you're part of it as well, Andy Davis. So obviously within that, I was just sharing my knowledge on like, I was helping my wife with her e-commerce store. So I was kind of sharing that thing. And then I noticed, okay, there's a group of people in this community that are D2C or e-commerce focused. So we created a separate WhatsApp group for e-commerce focused businesses. I was organizing meetups. So we'll meet up every 2 months and I would share what I know. I would invite speakers and so forth. The purpose of it was for me to learn also like from other people so I can apply my wife's business and vice versa. But what I noticed really quickly is that a lot of these guys wanted to grow their business. So I was trying to do like data analytics platforms for, once again, it goes back to this data thing. I wanted to build this platform that would give them all the insights they need to make decisions. Because I think decision making is one of the biggest challenges you have as an entrepreneur. They didn't care about that. All they cared about was how do I make money? So naturally it was like, well, we need somebody to run our Facebook ads. And I was like, well, I've run it for my wife's business, so why not? So I'll do an ad for this person and then they'll tell the next person, oh, Maz did a great job. And then next thing I know, I'm managing ads for like half of the group. So I didn't have the intention to run ads. My intention was to support this community because I believe I have an hypothesis. I think if we really want to create, whether it's generational wealth or even just personal wealth, or really create businesses in the community that will stand the test of time, we need to have a stronger foothold in the consumer industry because like everybody, it's the biggest industry in the UK. It's probably one of the biggest industries in the world. Like people buy products every single day. And although 99% of humans are the same, but there is a clear difference in our skin tone and our hair. So we need a particular different type of product for our hair and different type of product for our skin. And those are billion-dollar markets, which we don't have much control over. So I always felt like there's a great opportunity for anybody in that space who is, whether it's building a hair product for Afro-textured hair or building a skincare product for people, you know, with melanated skin, they should stand just as good as a chance to succeed as anybody. So that was kind of my thing, is like, okay, I'm going to help people that are trying to solve that problem. So it was deeper than ads, right? Ads was just a medium for me to be able to deliver service to that community. And it's kind of grown to a point where now we work with practically all the top D2C brands from the Black community in the UK, but also we work with non-Black owned businesses, right? We've had Series A SaaS businesses reach out to us off the work that we've done within the community, which is crazy. And for me, the deeper than ads thing becomes, every time I'm working with these brands, I'm identifying new problems. So the new problems would be around education. These are first-time founders. They don't know much about maybe building a team. How do you scale properly? How do you analyze performance, all that kind of stuff. So we then created direct culture, which is a separate part of the business, which is starts off with events. That was the events that connected the consumer brands with the creators. And then there's a direct culture academy, which is a fortnightly session, so kind of continuing what we did in the WhatsApp group. People can come learn about running ads, they can learn about SEO, they can learn about all these different tools that can help them grow their business. And that's for people of all sizes. So it could be a business that's literally starting out to a business that's turning over like 7 figures. So for me, I feel like my responsibility is way more than ads. I think my friend Timmy, Mr. Manager, he said to me, like, bro, like, you were put in this world more than just to do ads. And I agree with him. And I think the ads was me serving my community on their needs then. And I guess that's the learning from the Mixtape Madness thing, is I'm creating a solution that I believe is going to help you, even though it did 10 years later. I can't just say, well, I told you so. It's actually focusing on what's your needs today. And then through that trust and that learning and me being humble enough to understand the problems you need today, we can build solutions just that one step ahead. So then you're kind of always progressing.
Yeah, I love that, because you're literally staying with them every step of the way.
Exactly.
When there's all these problems, like, how do you know what to focus on?
Oh, it's hard to focus on knowing which problem. I mean, I've got so many ideas on how we can solve problems for the not just the community, but just from like wider people in, whether it's in the e-commerce space or whatever.
Yeah.
What I tend to do now is I just brain dump it to like my wife, because she's my business partner on direct culture. I'll brain dump it to my team, and then they organize it, and then we focus. I think for me, the biggest challenge I have is that there's so many problems that come up, but then it's always figuring out which one will have the biggest impact. So last year we made a decision that we're only going to work with 7-figure brands. Obviously that means like 95% of the brands in our community, and probably just in general, won't be able to work with us. So then it's like, okay, cool. But the reason for that was that we saw the impact that we were having by helping brands like Ava Estelle get to, 8 figures, the amount of people he's able to employ, and, the amount of people he's able to inspire. So it's almost like you have a greater impact through working with one brand than trying to get multiple brands to get to a certain level. I was actually speaking to my friend Andy Ayim, who you also know, and it's actually going to be a very interesting conversation that we're going to have for our next event. So the theme for our next event is called Transition. So every year we have a theme. So the first year it was around nostalgia, just kind of figuring out what things we have in common as a culture. Last year was around called Money Tree. It was about, how do we get to the money? How can we have comfortable conversations around money? This year is around transition. How do we transition to the next level? Like, how do you move from an e-commerce business to a consumer brand? How do you move from a podcast to a media company? Like, it just takes a different mindset. And I think what I was speaking to Andy about, I was like, even me, like when people say to me, would you ever sell Translate? And I was like, no, never. But I also have to stop and think, is that the right decision for my family, myself, and for the culture? Because sometimes you have to build a business to sell.
Yeah.
So then you have the capital to reinvest. And we've seen it happen with Rich Dennis, who sold Shea Moisture for nearly $1 billion. And the culture were like, how dare he, But he got Unilever, I believe it was, to invest 100 million into a fund which will help Black women start their own business. And through that, I think at least 2 or 3 businesses have been acquired at a faster pace than his.
Wow.
Right? So he took him 20 years to sell his business. These businesses have been acquired in 5 and 8 years in a much shorter span. So he's built this machine where he's actually created generational wealth much quicker. And I'm saying to Andy, to go back to that point again, is in some cases, it might be better to have one business in the culture that's doing 100 million than 10,000 businesses doing 10,000. Because ultimately, if those 10,000 businesses are doing 10,000, they're not making enough money to even look after themselves, let alone employ, people and actually have a real impact in the community. So it might be better to have one company that does 100, which we sell for 500 or 600 million. And then now we have a fund that can then fund those businesses, right? So that's always the challenge for us, because we get brands that knock at the door and be like, I can see they got so much potential, but I just can't help them at this moment in time. So that's why we got the direct culture. That's why we have the event. There's people who've stayed in our ecosystem so long that now they're clients because they've kind of gone through that sort of
graduation.
Yeah. So we always want to support everybody, but we have to also be super focused on what's going to have the biggest impact.
I love that. And it's like, even though you're focusing on those guys, there's still maybe the small next transit culture, which will deal with like upstarting brands, And exactly. I think that's what kind of takes the community to the next level, because it's similar to like people who work corporate jobs, right? You need someone who's gonna make it all the way to the top to become a CEO, not someone who's just gonna come at different ages, because when they come to CEO, then they have more influence to make certain decisions and bring more money into their pockets to the right places, right? So it is about transition. And on the topic of transition,
yes.
So what I admire about your career is that you're not scared to start from scratch. You're not scared to like put yourself out there to fail publicly or whatever it may be. And I want to talk about a few of those different transitions, because you basically were killing it marketing, then you decided to go into data, start from scratch at the BMJ, and then even there you put your head down, working hard, getting promoted, then you decided to leave to start a translate culture. So I'd love you to talk to me about like that kind of transition phase, what was going on through your mind, like when you knew it was the right time, and
thank you for actually reminded me of my own journey. Actually, I was thinking, oh gosh, I did all that. I think for me, the big factor in is when I stopped learning. I'm a lifelong learner. I just like to keep growing and learning and expanding. And there's the joke that me and my friends always have is we always say, leave as a champion. So we always use the Mike Tyson analogy. If Mike Tyson had retired before that fight with the one he lost with, I think it was in 1990 when he lost his first fight. If he retired just before that, he would be considered the greatest boxer of all time, right? But obviously he lost, and then it's like that impacts your
reputation.
Your reputation,
brand,
exactly. And also you can stay somewhere for too long as well. So that's always a problem. So for me, it's always like, once I've done everything I need to do in a particular job or a particular thing, I want to kind of climb another mountain. And sometimes climbing another mountain means you step down, right? Yes, you will go through the whole kind of questioning yourself and, imposter syndrome or whatever, but I actually don't mind that. I think for me, what I've learned is I've become riskier as I got older. So I'm the eldest of 6. So coming from an African household, I couldn't make any mistakes. It's like I had to go to uni, I had to do well because my sisters and my brothers had to look up to me. But then it got to a stage where it's like, actually, when I was in my mid-20s, it's like, am I living for myself or am I living for this kind of big expectation that I have, to stay in the straight and narrow path, which isn't really living. So I started consuming content that challenged my way of thinking. And I just started to take more risks. I started learning more about how the world works, like money and all of these different things, kind of just challenging some of the misconceptions of growing up. And it made me realize, actually, and it sounds cliche, but almost taking no risk is risky. Mm-hmm. So for me now, I take more risk on the basis that, okay, cool. I don't know everything. And my biggest regret would be not trying. There was a stage in my life where I was handicapped by the pressure of with his family and friends, kind of maintaining a particular persona. I did well in school. Yeah. Captain of the football team. Played for my borough.
Oh, you played ball, yeah?
Yeah, I played ball, yeah. I played for Charlton when I was 14.
Oh, swear.
Yeah. So there's that. So people kind of expect you. There's a lot of people I went to school with today who would be like, oh, I knew Maz, I knew you was going to be successful, right? But that's a lot of pressure because it's almost people are expecting you to succeed. So I always tell a story whenever I would go like to Tottenham. There's a famous place called Chick King.
Oh yeah, I know that.
Yeah, I'll always bump into somebody that went DNK or somebody I knew from school. And my wife was like, well, you know everybody. I was like, yeah, I went to DNK, that's why. and somebody will always be like, they'll be with their child or they'll be with their friend or they'll be with somebody. They'll be like, oh, that guy was the best footballer I've ever seen. Or that guy was the best rapper ever. Or that guy was one of the smartest people. And what it always showed to me, it was a conversation around potential that I didn't realize, right? It's almost like, it feels good sometimes. Some people like that nostalgia. Like, oh, when I was in school, I was the best footballer. But for me, it was like, actually, it's great that they're probably saying it from a place of endearment, whatever. But actually, for me, what it said is, it's a story of me not living up to my potential. I think there's a lot of people in our community that feel like that, right? In the sense that they didn't live up to the potential, whether it's talent or on anything. So for me, it was like, in the back of my mind, I was like, next time I come to Chiking, I don't want somebody telling their child, this guy was the best footballer ever. I want them to tell their child, this guy's built a company that is leveraging data and technology to help consumer brands, media brands, and personal brands in our culture. I want to be able to walk in there, it's like, oh, you know that product that mommy used? You know that ad that she saw and she bought it from? Yeah, this is the guy that helped that business get to 8 figures, right? And those kind of conversations are starting to happen. So for me, it was like, the biggest challenge I faced in terms of my ego, in terms of actually questioning myself, was a time when my potential was questioned or my intelligence was questioned, because you live in that bubble with like, I know everything. And what changed that, there's a book I read called Freakonomics when I was in uni. It was a book that showcased that there's an opposite side to everything. So it had stories of like why most drug dealers still live with their mums. And then there was like a fascinating story about also abortion, which I found quite interesting. Obviously, being a Christian, you know, you kind of have certain views that around that. But what happened was, in the book, it said that crime had dropped, and the American government or president at the time basically thought it was because of their laws, because they got tougher with crime. So they're like, yeah, we put more, we're tougher on crime, so we're putting more people into prison. That's why crime is down. But what they realized actually was 20 years prior, they had passed a law that allowed women to have the option to have an abortion. But what that did is it meant that the women that got impregnated through, maybe somebody doing something that they shouldn't have done, right? Or maybe got pregnant at a young age, who didn't actually want to have that child, had the option to not have that child, so not bring a child into the world earlier than they would have, they would have liked to, obviously out of wedlock, obviously into poverty, because if you're a teenage mother, you probably haven't finished school, you have no money. So what the ability to allowing people to have abortion enabled was less people were bringing children into the world, into poverty, and they had a choice. So that meant that there was less children being born out of poverty. So then that means that crime dropped. But any given president or any given candidate could have looked at that data and just said, yeah, it's because we need to get tougher in crime. And for me, that was like, wow. Irrespective of what I think of abortion or whatever, it's like, okay, look, this is actually data that's proven to have worked the other way. And we can also see how that can be manipulated politically to say, put more people into prison. So that book shifted my mind, and it kind of was like, actually, things aren't always as clear as it seems initially, right? So it's okay to be wrong. You're not always going to be right 100% of the time. And I think that book was a massive shift for me, because what it enabled me to see the world is like, actually, you know what? Have an hypothesis, go out to the world, test it. And if you fail, you look at the data or you look at the insight, you learn again and you go again. And I think that's really the only way you can really live in this world, is just not to be too restrictive on yourself in terms of like, I am smart, I know this, I am going to be successful. I do believe you need to believe you're going to be successful. It's just how you get there. You need to be a little bit more flexible. Yeah,
I love that. And Freakonomics, that book opened up my eyes.
Amazing book.
Bro. Like that abortion story. And it's funny because people talk about it now, and like the broken windows policy, all that kind of stuff. And you can manipulate, as you said, data any way which you want to. And even the data relating to your own personal self and your own potential, and why it's important to test the stories that we tell ourselves, because just because you were gifted and talented, up until year 11 doesn't necessarily mean you're gifted and talented now.
Exactly.
You know, things change, and you have to be willing to change with that and have that kind of growth mindset, which some people don't, because they like their past image. And it's amazing to hear that you're happy to kind of shed that reputation
100%.
of like, oh, I was the best footballer, I was the smartest in the class, to let me actually change my identity and be free in the knowledge of like, it can go anywhere, it can go up to infinity, and the only way it can go down is I'm still the best footballer that everyone knows, right?
Exactly. I agree.
So going back to that time when I first saw you at that Indie Hackers event, so what did that change in your mindset when you saw Johnny?
I'll tell you what, that was really fascinating. So just to give some background. So I got invited to speak at the Indie Hackers and had the privilege to be with Johnny, who I believe, I don't know if he's still the wealthiest under 30, or well, he's probably over 30 now, but he's one of the wealthiest young people in this country. So I got invited to speak about my journey with Mixtape Madness, with different businesses that I've built. And I just basically walked through the framework of how I think about business. And I was still a BMJ at the time. And I remember the question in the crowd is like everybody was like, bro, you've kind of validated everything. When are you going to leap? When are you going to take this jump, right? And I probably could have leapt a lot sooner. So maybe there was still an element of like, not sure, kind of just, really trying to validate one more time. But what's interesting about Johnny did his presentation, and I found his presentation really fascinating. And we spoke after, he found my presentation really fascinating. And his story was, I think he had a condition which meant that he couldn't always go out. So he was always trying to build a platform to solve that problem. So for other people who can't obviously go out, I think he tried like a dating app and all these different things. And then he ended up building this platform, which was like a place for people to meet, almost like an events business, but for people that were kind of stuck at home. Obviously that was 2019 when we spoke. Almost less than a year later, the world changed, right? Everybody was locked in their homes. All the events companies had lost millions because they had to cancel the events. And he built this platform which was like perfectly positioned to still have these multi-million-dollar companies or billion-dollar companies, and some of these event companies are huge, still have their events during lockdown. And obviously he'd raised so much money. And he became a billionaire.
Yeah.
And for me, when I sat back and I thought about that, I was like, you go on Instagram and you see all these people telling you that 5 steps to success, you need to do this X and Y and whatever. And if you remember my presentation, I even talked about, there was a slide that I had was Bill Gates, I had Mark Zuckerberg, and I think Jeff Bezos, and I said something about, I'm trying to remember, why don't these guys write how-to books? And my hypothesis was they're too busy creating value, that they haven't got time to stop and write the books, right? They're just in the game, and I just believe like you just got to be in it to win it. Like success comes from action and being in the arena, right? And I mean, Johnny hasn't written a book, right? He's in the game. He was trying to solve a problem for himself, and then the timing meant that he solved the problem for millions of people in the world, and he's rightfully so a billionaire, right? But what that also shows me that whether you take that story, you take the K-Coke story, or you take other stories in my journey, luck plays a part. There are some people who have good luck. Well, most people have good and bad luck at any given time. But it's like, once you've identified, okay, I've been lucky in this particular situation, how do I maximize it, right? I do think there is something that comes from intelligence, something that comes from tacit knowledge, something that comes from practice. But I think there's also a level of humbleness that we all need to have to realize that actually tomorrow's a policy could change, which could turn my business upside down. And I could make millions because the government decided to put hundreds of millions of pounds into black consumer brands. I've got nothing to do with that. I've just positioned myself in the thing that I've doubled down in this community that I wanted to serve. And now, perfect example, lockdown meant that a lot of hair shops were closed. So a lot of the hair brands that we were running ads for, they had no physical competition. So everybody was buying hair products online. So we scaled a lot of black hair consumer brands into 6 figures because of lockdown. Like people couldn't go to Tottenham High Road to get hair, right? That was luck, right? I quit my job in 2019. 2020, March 23rd, I had an event planned on the 24th, which was going to be about what's the next phase of growth. So once again, always been throwing these events. 23rd, the day before, Boris shuts lockdown everything. 2 days later, I get an email from a few of my clients say, look, we need to stop working because we're not sure where things are going. And rightly so, like I wasn't sure where things were going. Bear in mind, we just got a mortgage. We got a 2-year-old. My wife just quit her job the year before because she saw what I did and she wanted to take a plunge and go full-time with her job.
Both of you at the same time?
Both, yeah. She wanted to go full-time with her startup, with her e-commerce business. And I'm the only person that's bringing in the bread. And for some reason, I still had the faith that it was going to work out. I even recorded a video where I said, I'm going to write a daily blog of how I'm going to come out of this. I only did one video because I got too busy and I couldn't do it. But what was so fascinating about that is my wife's business blew up because of two things. One, she always wanted to teach people how to make lampshades. And other entrepreneurs actually told her not to. It's like, why would you give people your secret sauce? She realized she didn't get into this business to make interior products. She actually got into business to teach. So we was always going to do like a workshop where people can come and whatever. Then what we realized is she was always losing money at the end of every year because of shipping, because her lampshades are huge. So then during lockdown, we decided, when we saw the data, that most people were trying to learn new skills because they're stuck at home through Zoom. So we said, what if we recorded a course where we could teach people how to make the lampshades themselves? We'll send it to them in a flat package so shipping would be cheaper. You don't have to make it. We sell it to thousands of people. We record the video once and we make money that way. We launched it. It went viral. It was even featured on Martha Stewart. So that was during March lockdown. That started bringing her revenue. And just when, obviously, the George Floyd things happened, a lot of people ended up discovering her because she was on Jammy, which is Jammy, the platform which I was helping with their ads. And I remember speaking to Kalia when lockdown happened, and she was like, look, I'm super concerned about all the brands on our platform. I said, look, let's double down. You need to be on live every Tuesday. You need to create a show because people are going to need routine, right? I'll even be the first person. I'll come and I'll talk about data. You can get this person to come talk about finance, whatever. So she created a show where she was basically giving education to black entrepreneurs. George Floyd happens, and obviously the allyship movement started. And there was a white woman who created a blog, went on to Jammy, because Jammy had this profile, and found 10 brands that you should buy, black businesses you should buy. Out of the 10 businesses, 6 of them were my clients. Top of that list was my wife. So we woke up the next day and we had hundreds of orders coming in. Like we were making like 20,000, 30,000 pounds from June to November every month. That month we did about 40 grand and 80% of that came from that post. But I couldn't tell you that was going to happen, right? These are just us being in the market, just testing and following all these different things. And it's like, when I look back at it, it's like what the seeds that I had planted in others bared fruit. Because in supporting Jamie and Kalia and making them more visible is one of the reasons that person discovered them. Because the question is like, which platform has all the black businesses? Well, it's Jamie. There were others, but we helped make Jamie more visible. In helping my wife do the things that she's passionate about, which is educating and sharing with others, she could have taken the logical advice of don't do it because people can copy it. But it got us out of the rut of losing money through shipping. So I share all of that. And going back to Johnny's story is like, there's a certain level of humility that you need to have in business and in life in general. Like you almost just need to do what feels right at the time. And in my case, it's worked out. Mm-hmm. So I can only sort of vouch for that. Maybe I'm biased to that, but I would love to be an example of that person that just kind of like, you know, within your greatness, also know that there's things working in your favor that you just can't explain. Yeah. And you don't always have to create a course on it because we also need to be very transparent and honest of when things go our way and when they don't. It's how you bounce from it and how you sort of navigate within that is what will make you a success or not.
Yeah, no, that story, awesome, man. I think like throughout, even just your whole journey, it's always this like act of service, like being of service of others, and kind of thinking of yourself second. It's like a common theme is like helping people get to the next level, and then through that you're elevating yourself. Am I right in saying that?
Oh yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So how does that feel? Well, not how does that feel, but like, do you sometimes feel that you don't have enough time for yourself? Or that you're putting your own ambition on hold for other people? Like, how do you balance that kind of dialogue in your head? If you have that dialogue.
No, very good question. I don't think I've personally had that dialogue. I've never looked at it that way. But people around me have made me aware of it. It's like, okay, just be mindful that you're not, for lack of a better word, being taken advantage of, that you're not filling up your own cup. So I think for me, what's really fascinating, I talk about Christianity, it's a big part of my life. And if you read the Bible, a lot of Jesus' teaching is around service, right? There's so many scriptures that talk about you're given a gift to serve others. So my company, we have 3 values. Be an ambitious servant, focus on our core competencies, and take care. And you can kind of see where this is going, because focus on our core competencies, that's the same thing I was trying to do with Mixtape Madness, right? So I fundamentally believe in that there's something that you have in your core that you can keep within yourself that will elevate you. It could be a gift, it could be a piece of IP, it could be a piece of technology, or whatever it is. Take care part is like, I've always wanted to build a business that actually takes care of, people take care of themselves, they take care of their family. It's like business is here to be a service to the community and the individual. Not to say it's the most important, but the leading one is being an ambitious servant. And it's a bit of a oxymoron, because servitude is deemed to be like a lower than, right? If I'm serving you, I'm lower than you. And being ambitious is like, well, how could you be ambitious when you're serving? I actually believe that's the best form of ambition. Every business serves somebody. You talk about Jeff Bezos, for how many years has been the wealthiest man in the world. And what does he talk about? Service. The customer's always right. Walmart, which is like one of the biggest companies in the world, was built off of service, like customer service. If you don't service your customers, you don't have a business. So for me, it's one of those things where I fundamentally believe that, and it's like everything. You pick things that are true to who you are. So maybe I'm nitpicking, maybe I'm reading the Bible and I'm understanding it in terms of how I interpret it, but that's how it should be. Like these are stories, right? So my whole thing is around, my story is, I've just naturally always had that, maybe being the oldest or whatever, but it comes from somewhere and I can't explain it. I think that's part of the problem as well, is society, we become we almost want an answer to everything. We're almost like, why am I like this? Well, you may never find out why you're like that. Maybe you might do through therapy and stuff, but actually sometimes it's worth just living who you are. And I think for me, I've always been a type of person that likes to bring people together. I like being around people that are forward thinking. I like to see people grow, and I grow within that. So in terms of answer your question, I've never felt, it was almost a situation where I almost believe I'm going to be a success regardless. So it's almost like you just help others, because I've never doubted my own potential. Just because as a kid, I've always done very well. So there's that. But then I've also seen the fruit of, by serving others, you also gain a lot. So to answer your question, I've never sat down and thought about, am I missing out on anything? But other people have said to me like, okay, you need to make sure that you're doing more for yourself. And that's something I've kind of done in the last 2 to 3 years. So it's like, okay, when I get up in the morning now, the first thing I do is I make sure I exercise, or I meditate and do something that's beneficial for me. So even today, like, I looked at my diary, 80% of it was client stuff. And only one meeting was about the event that we're about to throw. And it's like, I nearly even cancelled that meeting. I was like, no, you can't cancel that. So every day I'm trying to do something that's gonna, add more to my cup as well. But yeah, it's just the way I'm wired, and I don't judge it too much. But I do believe act of service is is key to business.
Would you say that's part of your purpose as well then?
100%. Yeah, I think my purpose is to use my God-given gifts to help others, because it's of service. So in the Bible, it talks about being a vessel, being God's vessel. So the reason you have that skill set is to deliver, I guess, God's will through acts of physical service, because somebody has to do the thing. And there's a fascinating story. It's not in the Bible, but it's a story that my friend used to tell me when we were growing up. He's like, there was a guy who was stuck in the middle of the sea, and he prayed to God. He's like, God, come save me. And then a couple guys came in a boat, and he's like, oh no, don't worry, God's coming. They kept praying. Then another boat came, like, mate, come on, get in, you're gonna die. He's like, no, don't worry, God is coming. Then another boat came. He's like, guys, look, I'm fine, God is coming. And then eventually, he died. This is a parable. And then, met God, and he was like, God, why didn't you come? He's like, so who do you think sent those three people? Right? So it's these things I fundamentally believe that's like, when you pray for something or you wish for something, it's normally going to come through other humans. And I'm just trying to be a vessel for that, for others. And I've benefited from it massively. So yeah, it's about being true to who I am and then see where we land.
This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Cool. Before we wrap up, I've got a couple of quick fire questions for you. So my first question, I love my books. Mm-hmm. What's one book that you recommend the most?
Oof. Just one.
Give me two then.
I was going to give you three. I would say Freakonomics.
Yep.
Just as we said, it sort of shifted my mind and just made me realize that actually, there's two sides to each story, sometimes even more. So that's great. The second book is Andrew Carnegie. So I think it's a biography. I don't know what the writer's name is. I think his first name is David something. It's a picture of Andrew Carnegie walking. It's like a white cover. He's walking down the street. So for the people that don't know who Andrew Carnegie is Andrew Carnegie was the richest man in the world, I believe, in the early 20th century, late 19th century. He was a Scottish guy, left for America with his family. His mom and dad came from a poor background, but his dad was very stubborn. His dad was I think he was like a mill, like he was making clothes and stuff, like using the old technology. And Industrial Revolution came, so people start using new machinery. His dad didn't want to change. He's like, no, the old school way is the way forward. And he saw his family get poorer because of his dad's stubbornness. And he used to go to the library every day to learn new technology. And at the time, the technology was, what's the thing when you, telegraphs? Telegrams, yeah. And he just learned that skill. And then he became well known in the community as a person to go for telegrams, I think it is. And through that, he met some very wealthy people because they were using that to pass on information about, business opportunities and whatever. So his whole life shifted by having a skill that became valuable to rich people, right? And the Bible, going back to the Bible, it says your skills will take you to, your gift will take you in front of kings. He's an example of that. And what I learned from that book is the thing about niching down and staying true to learning and unlearning and relearning. And I think he saw his dad as an example of somebody being stubborn and was poor through his stubbornness. He chose to be the opposite, and then he became the richest man in the world. And there's a great line in the book which says his mum, she was the wife of a poor man, but died the mother of the richest man in the world. That's an incredible story. And the key difference was one was stubborn and one wasn't. Mm. So that kind of leans back into like being open-minded, similar to the Freakonomics. And the third book, this is more for people sort of like in the culture, sort of interested in like music and business, is The Tanning of America by Steve Stout. And he talks about how hip-hop, a culture that was started by inner city African-American kids and Hispanic kids, poor inner city kids as well, became this billion-dollar industry that's influencing consumer brands and just literally influencing culture. And it's to a point now where it doesn't matter what culture you come from, what skin color you have, what country you come from. Most of the world's youth are influenced by hip hop. So it was kind of just basically saying that how the culture has now become so influential that it's no longer about color, it's about being part of that culture and how you define yourself. And it kind of gives everybody the freedom to feel a way to express themselves. And he's a good example because he started in the music industry and now he's a big advertising mogul. And the reason the transition came from Men in Black, he realized how much money Ray-Ban made from the Men in Black soundtrack.
Oh, really?
And that's how he shifted into advertising. And obviously, similar story to myself. Started Mixtape Madness, music industry. Now I'm in advertising because like consumer brands are the biggest in the world. P&G, Unilever, all of these guys, they actually are the biggest spenders of advertising on media. Without their money, a lot of the media companies that we watch wouldn't be in business. Yeah. So then it's like, well, why don't we play that game as well? So those are the 3 books I would recommend.
Love that. What's one piece of advice that you hear people give all the time, but you actually think it's bad advice?
Oh, that's a very good question. What's one piece of advice that I hear people give all the time that I actually think is bad advice? I think it's probably more to do with charge your worth. I think that's bad advice because what is your worth? I think a lot of people place their worth on random numbers that they've plucked out of the air. They also place their worth maybe on what somebody else was paid. And I think money is a byproduct of the value you bring. Now, depending on who you're serving, you may have to charge a bit lower than you would if you were serving a bigger person with deeper pockets. And the reason I think that's bad advice is because what is your worth? How do you quantify your worth? And it really depends who you're in the game for. Because if you're in the game of serving customers, you kind of need to find a common ground on what that customer can afford and what you can afford to take in order for you to deliver the value. And over time, I believe you'll be paid, quote unquote, what you're worth. So for example, when we started, we were charging brands, probably undercharging, to be honest, because I didn't know what it was that I needed to charge. I wanted the experience. Now, we charge very competitive towards the market, but it's because of the track record I had to build. So I think people can sometimes outprice themselves because they have this number in their head that they need to hit. I think what's more valuable is you building a track record where people almost throw money at you and you can get there. So I actually think that's bad advice, to charge your worth, because what is your worth? How do you quantify it? I think if you can define an audience that you wanna serve, you kind of need to find a medium ground on what works for them. And sometimes even undercharging is a great thing because it actually allows you to get a yes, because you just want to get in and prove your worth. And the reason why I say it's bad advice to people similar to myself who are trying to build long term. If you need the money now, then you need to charge what your bill is, what you need to pay to live, whatever. Like, if you're in that kind of dire situation, I would never say undercharge yourself if you're not a long-term thinker. But I actually think for quite a number of people, I think charging your worth is bad advice because one, you don't know what your worth is. You kind of need to be valuable to that business or to the person who's paying. And if you're a longer-term thinker, it's probably the best approach is to charge what they're charging, maybe even a little bit lower. And it actually gives you much bigger room for you to deliver value. And then if you have the right type of people, then there's opportunity for you to negotiate for a better deal. Yeah,
because I think the best recommendation or review is when they say, oh, my days, he was so sick. And you over-delivered. Yeah. The worst thing is when people are saying, oh, why'd I pay this guy that money?
Exactly that. And I think for me, it's, when I started serving the communities that I was serving, is like I noticed who they were paying. They were paying people in like third world countries and whatever. So I knew money. I know culturally money was an issue. Mm-hmm. Like I know I could have charged way more, but then it's like, actually, you know what? I also want to test myself. What if my ads don't bang? Yeah. Right. And it goes back to this thing around like, what is your worth? It's an hypothesis, right? I say I can go tomorrow and say to them, I'll charge somebody 10 grand to speak. Some institutions will pay that, but does that mean then I can then go to another venue where I know they barely have £1,000 and charge them 10,000? But I also have to think strategically, maybe this is the right place for me to speak because it's going to open doors. So just think long term, like money is is a tool at the end of the day. The real goal, I think for me, and not to project this to everybody else, is freedom. It's like, how much freedom can this money provide for you? Like, I wake up in the morning, I get to work with who I want to work with, and do what I want to do and build and invest in my own ideas. But it started from not thinking that I needed to charge more than anyone or just this random number out there, because also I have to feel within myself that actually, you know what I'm charging is right. But maybe that's just how I'm built personally. But I think that's bad advice for quite a number of people, especially if you don't have a track record. If you don't have a track record, you need to take whatever money they can give you.
Yeah. What's one piece of advice you wish you listened to earlier?
That's a very good question. These are good, bro. You're good at this. You're really good at this. So what piece of advice I wish I would listen to earlier? I think one of the things that I've discovered along this journey is that you can't do it by yourself. So as much as this business is very much my hypothesis, like it's basically an embodiment of who I am, what I've learned along the way is knowing when to sort of get help from other people. And I'm not bad at it. Like, I'm not from an ego thing, or I want to do it by myself, but I have a certain level of quality that I want to deliver, which sometimes is tied up into your reputation. For me, reputation is a big thing in anything, in branding and everything. So we've got to make sure that we've got a positive reputation by doing great work. And sometimes it's meant that we've overcommitted at times, and then it puts a lot of pressure to then deliver to that. So one of the lessons that I've learned now is actually don't make a decision too soon. Like, almost like make sure you have the resources to be able to sort of deliver. I'm probably a people pleaser as well, underlining under somewhere, which I'm kind of learning. But why I mentioned bringing other people in is one of the first things I did in my business is when I had a board. So my friend Eugene, my friend Richard, and my friend Andy Aim were bored, and people were like, bro, like, you're barely doing 5 figures. Why have you got a board? A board is usually for businesses that are doing millions of pounds. I was like, no, I understand now that I need people to hold me accountable, because there's certain parts of my characteristic which is going to be a detriment to the business. For example, if, eager to do great work. So I sometimes may make a decision a lot quicker, but now I have 2 or 3 other people that I can just sense check it before I make that decision. That's super helpful. So when we're doing multi-6 figures and we're now moving into 7 figures, it's like, well, actually that was a great decision to have, because we've put in the framework of how we can grow this business to a point where most people would acquire a board. So I think the best advice I had is you can't do it by yourself. And have people around you who complement your areas of weaknesses and your strengths.
Love that. And then final question. Mm-hmm. Where can people find you?
Where can people find me? Oh, cool. At Transday Culture on Instagram, at Masibu _ Manima on Instagram. We've also got at Direct Culture on Instagram. Like, those are probably the best platforms. I mostly post there. And then you can learn more about our events and all the other great things we do through there. The next event is on the 18th to the 19th of July. So we're actually going to do 2 days. So on the 18th is going to be, I don't know when this episode is going to come out, so we'll keep it a bit of a secret. But yes, 18th and 19th of July. We're going to announce that next week anyway, so that's fine. July, and it'll be in Shoreditch, so that'll be amazing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you, man.
Cheers.
Thank you.